On this Friday night, Donald Trump calls NATO countries cowards. The U.S. president's anger at allies for failing to protect the Strait of Hormuz and the global oil industry, as millions of Muslims mark the end of Ramadan in a war zone.
Thank God there were no injuries.
Attention scalpers, how one province plans to crack down on resale ticket prices. Remembering the ultimate tough guy. Tributes to action star and pop culture powerhouse Chuck Norris. Plus, mocking the police with music.
They found no kidnapping victims, just some lemon pound cake.
One rapper's legal fight for freedom of speech.
Global National. Reporting tonight, Jeff Semple.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. The war in Iran is about to enter its fourth week, but the endgame remains unclear. Late today, the U.S. president said he's considering winding down the U.S. operation.
Oh, I think we've won. We've knocked out their Navy, their Air Force. We've knocked out their anti-aircraft. We've knocked out everything. We're roaming free. But from a military standpoint, they're finished.
Despite those claims, Iran continues to fire back, striking targets across the region, including critical oil infrastructure. Iran is also tightening its grip on the Strait of Hormuz, the vital shipping route, sending oil prices soaring again today. Trump is calling on other countries to help protect the strait, including China and Japan. And he lashed out at NATO allies, calling them cowards. Redmond Shannon has our top story tonight.
Eid al-Fitr in Lebanon, marking the end of Ramadan. These, some of the hundreds of thousands of Lebanese displaced by the war. It is also a very different Eid in Jerusalem. Prayers held outside the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. The holy site has been closed off since the start of the conflict. And this is why. Debris from an Iranian missile landing in an area sacred to Muslims and Jews.
There was only damage to cars and to buildings, but thank God there were no injuries.
Eid fell on the Persian festival of Nowruz this year, as US and Israeli airstrikes continued across Iran. An Iranian New Year's message from Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei read out by state TV. Questions about whether he was injured in the Israeli strike that killed his father remain unanswered. His statement suggesting Israel carried out false flag attacks against Turkey and Oman. Another news anchor read out a threat from Iran's military that its enemies would now be targeted in tourist sites around the world.
At this point, they will stop at absolutely nothing. I think these threats should be taken very seriously.
US President Donald Trump again directed his ire at his NATO allies, calling them cowards for not offering to help open the Strait of Hormuz. 20 countries now say they will help, but only after a ceasefire. However, this evening, the UK now says it has approved American use of its air bases for strikes that help reopen the key waterway. It had previously permitted that for strikes against Iranian missile sites. Donald Trump says the UK should have acted a lot faster. Iran says it regards Britain's actions as participation in the war. Jeff?
Redmond Shannon in London. Thanks, Red. In response to President Trump's calls for help from NATO countries, the Office of Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister, Anita Anand, released this statement, saying any potential support would be guided by the needs on the ground, Canada's legal and policy frameworks, and ongoing consultations with partners and allies. Now, despite President Trump claiming military victory in Iran, multiple U.S. media reports say the U.S. is planning to deploy more troops and warships to the Middle East. As Candice Cole reports, the prospect of American troops entering the conflict isn't sitting well with voters.
Oh, I think we've won. We've knocked out their Navy, their Air Force.
U.S. President Donald Trump striking a confident tone on the progress of the U.S.-Israel war on Iran, now well into its third week. Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu appeared to bump heads on strategy in Iran after Israeli forces struck Iran's South Pars gas field, leading to retaliatory airstrikes by Iran on the world's largest liquefied natural gas plant in Qatar.
On occasion, he'll do something, and if I don't like it, and so we're not doing that.
But some analysts say any suggestion the two leaders are out of sync is an exaggeration.
For the most part, it's remarkable how aligned these two important world leaders are. Both sides, especially Israel, aspire to an outcome they can't deliver.
But as the two powers struggle to find an off-ramp to the war with Iran and open up the critical Strait of Hormuz for the free flow of oil, Trump is working to secure an additional $200 billion to expand his military campaign in the Middle East, which was initially thought to be a quick operation. Trump is hedging, sending troops to Karg Island, a major oil hub just 15 miles off Iran's coast, where U.S. forces struck down military assets last week, a move that would be unpopular amongst most Americans. In a new Reuters Ipsos poll of 1,545 people, a majority of Americans do not support sending U.S. ground troops to Iran, with only 7% supporting the prospect.
It's not necessarily something that should be binding on President Trump. It should be informing his thinking. It should be reminding him that part of his political success has been to challenge the big operations in Iraq and Afghanistan.
2,200 more U.S. Marines are now set to deploy to the Middle East, along with 3 more warships. So far, more than 2,000 people have been killed since the start of the war, including 13 U.S. troops. Jeff?
Candice Cole in Washington. Thanks, Candice. A new government report warns the war in Iran raises the risk of attacks here in Canada targeting the Jewish community. Our Mackenzie Gray is looking into that from Ottawa. Mac, what more can you tell us?
Global News has obtained a new report from the Integrated Threat Assessment Center, Jeff, that says there's a realistic possibility of a violent extremist attack targeting the Jewish community in Canada in the next 6 months. The report says the most likely scenario is a lone actor using an unsophisticated method against an easily accessible target, but provides no other details on the scope, scale, or location of any potential attack. While hate crimes against Jews in Canada decreased substantially in 2025 with the ceasefire in the Gaza-Israel war, there are still more reported hate crimes against Jews than all other religions combined, according to StatsCan. Since the war in Iran has started, 3 synagogues in Toronto have been shot at, and Jewish businesses owned in Montreal have been attacked, including having swastikas spray painted on them. The threat assessment report was focused on potential violent extremist attacks against public officials, like politicians, who they deem to be at a heightened risk since the war has started. But overall, they still say an attack is very unlikely. Despite that, the agency does believe it's very likely that there will be an increase in violent rhetoric, hate crimes, and criminal intimidation targeting Jewish public officials in Canada, Jeff, and other officials perceived to be supporting Israel.
Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa. Thanks, Mac. The federal government is proposing billions of dollars in spending cuts, targeting a wide range of programs from science to tourism to foreign aid, with plans to boost funding for defense and the provinces. MPs will debate those proposals when they return to Parliament next week. Our David Aiken has the details.
We say we're going to spend less so we can invest more. We found $60 billion of saving across different departments of the Government of Canada.
That's the line the Carney government has been using ever since the budget was tabled last fall. Now, new documents have been tabled in Parliament, which provide some details about where those $60 billion in savings are coming from. Some of the spending cuts come from a government-wide review aimed at finding efficiencies. Some savings will be had as programs expire or sunset.
Canadian families are tightening their belt. I think it's about time that the federal government does the same.
Some examples: there will be less money to maintain the country's small craft harbors. A program that gave grants to tourism operators will expire. The CBC will have its budget cut by $192 million. Canada will end its international climate finance funding commitment, and that move alone will save $812 million. The Canadian Space Agency is sending one of its astronauts, Jeremy Hansen, to the moon this year. But it's also losing 1/3 of its funding, or about $400 million. And, as a result, it will end development of a Canadian lunar rover module.
Yes, we need to look at savings. Yes, we need to use more technology. And I think Canadians at home understand that.
Some of the savings are because one-time only events are unlikely to be repeated next year. Canada Post, for example, is supposed to be self-financing, but it needed a one-time $2 billion contribution from the government last year. And that cash injection, well, the government hopes not to make it next year. But for all those departments dealing with spending cuts, some are getting spending boosts. François-Philippe Champagne's own Department of Finance is asking Parliament for an extra $8.5 billion in order to fund increases in social and health transfers to the provinces. The Department of National Defense will get an extra 12%, or more than $5 billion next year. Now, all told, Defense, Finance, and 38 other departments will collectively get $23 billion more to spend next year, while 85 departments will be spending $31 billion less. Jeff.
David Aiken, thanks. The Ontario government is promising to crack down on resale ticket prices. It follows public outcry after scalpers charged thousands of dollars for Taylor Swift and the Blue Jays World Series tickets. The proposed changes would make it illegal for tickets to concerts, sports, and live events to be resold for more than face value. Sean O'Shea reports.
It's an issue that live concert and sports fans wrestle with all the time.
Music fans, concert goers, sports fans should not have to look at their pocketbook, go into credit card debt.
As anyone who went to a Taylor Swift concert or a World Series game last year appreciates, the original ticket price often isn't what you'll pay because tickets get resold at a much higher price.
And there were so many ways that these resellers managed to get a hold of these tickets that it's a game of whack-a-mole.
The Ontario government says it plans to introduce a law aimed at preventing sellers from marking up sports and concert tickets, pledging access to fair resale prices, saying consumers would no longer need to worry about being ripped off in the ticket resale market.
I think this is an admirable, noble, but ultimately doomed initiative on behalf of the Ford government.
It was tried before in Ontario under the Liberals, but scrapped by the Conservatives.
Doug Ford's coming in and saying, I'm the white knight. I'm saving all of you.
It's just going to drive the prices back up at the box office.
Brian Berry's organization represents secondary ticket marketplaces like StubHub. He says the company that stands to benefit, Live Nation Ticketmaster, which controls about 2/3 of the primary ticket industry.
The only ones who should truly be celebrating upon the news today in Ontario are shareholders at Live Nation Ticketmaster.
Live Nation Ticketmaster said it supports the Ontario government's commitment to protecting fans. The company's on trial in New York, accused of running a monopoly. In evidence, one employee talked about robbing fans blind in internal messages.
What we've learned at this trial is how we cannot trust a word coming out of anyone's mouth at Live Nation Ticketmaster.
Berry argues if fans can't sell their tickets on third-party sites legally, they'll go elsewhere.
Whenever you have something of very, very limited quantity that has got very, very great demand, the market's going to take over.
Ontario hasn't released details of how the new law will work or, more importantly, actually be enforced. Critics call this an exercise in PR for the government that won't lead to lower ticket prices. Jeff.
Sean O'Shea in Toronto. Thanks, Sean. Selling spuds. Coming up, the promising new market for PEI's potato farmers. Canadian potato growers are looking forward to sending their spuds to Mexican customers. A new agreement has been reached between the two nations. It's been years since fresh Canadian potatoes have been allowed into Mexico. Heidi Petracek reports on the potatoes' potential in the new market.
Prince Edward Island is among Canada's biggest potato growing provinces, producing more than 1 million metric tons a year.
It's always important that we keep opening doors to ensure, we have our markets and our business are sustainable.
The news doors are opening for fresh Canadian potatoes to enter Mexico. Welcome. PEI's potato industry, like many, has faced uncertainty with its biggest customer, the United States, even after it was spared from U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs.
This year it was more in the oversupply situation because U.S. has had a huge crop of potatoes. Plus, the economy is not as good as it used to be.
Which has meant fewer PEI potatoes on American plates. The agreement between the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and its Mexican counterpart, signed after recent Canadian trade trips, clears the way for work to begin on sorting out how to ship spuds by sea from the island down to Mexico.
This means that not only do we have access to that market, but they'll accept CFIA inspection of those products, so it'll make it easier.
It won't be big at the beginning because there's a lot of work to be done in getting the trade link established and also the customer base.
Potatoes are covered under the free trade agreement between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, up for mandatory review this year. Trump has called the deal he signed in 2020 irrelevant, worries he may abandon it, pushing Canada to find new trading partners.
If we're continuing to find opportunities with Mexico, that's a good thing if CUSMA is renegotiated or dies. But it's also a good thing, even in the context of CUSMA.
We're all more concerned with who we're trading with now.
After a dry growing season last year, island potato farmers hope 2026 will bring better weather and a bigger yield, anticipating some of this year's crop could head Mexico's way. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Halifax.
He's a Adams County sheriff. He's hungry and he's big as hell.
Still ahead, why police in Ohio say this rapper's music video is defamation.
And I know why. Why, man? Yeah, cause I got high. Because I got high. Because I got high.
Well, if you were born before the 2000s, you might remember this song, Because I Got High by Joseph Foreman, better known as Afro Man, topped the charts 25 years ago. And the American rapper is riding high this week after a legal victory against Ohio police. Mike Armstrong has the extraordinary legal saga.
Mine eyes seen the corruption of the Adams County cops.
An artist doesn't always see inspiration coming. Well, for Afro Man, it arrived carrying a search warrant.
August 21st was the day.
Back in 2022, local police raided the rapper's home in southern Ohio. No charges were ever filed, but Afro Man says some money in his home disappeared and there was damage.
Will you help me repair my game?
Afro Man used footage from police body cams and his own security system and put together music videos ridiculing the police and a few others outlining what happened. The warrant said the officers were investigating drugs and kidnapping.
I don't kidnap people. I kidnap cheeseburgers.
So this is just an example. Now, 7 of the officers involved took Afro Man to court this week, suing him for defamation. They argued the diss tracks invaded their privacy and intentionally inflicted emotional distress. Afro Man countered that the songs were covered by free speech.
The whole raid was a mistake.
He testified he wrote the songs to pay for damages to his home in a botched raid that never should have happened.
If they hadn't came to my house, they wouldn't have put themselves on the video camera and in my music career.
Yeah! We did it, America! Well, after a 3-day trial, the jury sided with Afro Man.
He's hooked on coke and Oxycontin.
The case may go down as one where suing over a song gave the story oxygen.
The humiliation was actually increased by the fact that they brought this claim.
Not only is it being picked apart by legal experts, but comedians are having a field day as well.
Wow. Wow. I don't know if I want to stand up and salute because of the speech he gave or because he's wearing all the American flags.
Lemon pound cake.
In one of his videos, Afro Man mocks an officer who stopped to admire a cake on his kitchen counter. There's a bit of symbolism in the song from the ordeal and all the attention he's getting. When life gives you lemons, Afro Man says, you make lemon pound cake.
Lemon pound cake, pound cake.
Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
You're leaving all right, but you're going to jail.
No.
He brought us martial arts, movies, and memes. Up next, remembering Chuck Norris. Welcome back. His toughness was the stuff of legend and also became a popular punchline. Chuck Norris turned his martial arts prowess into a thriving Hollywood career, and his image has been immortalized in countless memes that kept fans laughing long after his retirement. The 86-year-old passed away yesterday, surrounded by his family. Eric Sorensen looks back at the life of the Walker, Texas Rangers star.
When Sylvester Stallone and some action hero friends needed help in Expendables 2,
Hey, who did that?
who else? The legendary action hero himself.
You did all this?
I fly solo. I thought you knew that.
It was a nod to Chuck Norris. Unlike most Hollywood stars, he really knew how to fight. He learned growing up without a father.
I think as a child, I had a certain amount of low self-esteem, and
The martial arts really helped turn my life around.
Norris became the middleweight world champion in karate. His big break in film came in The Way of the Dragon. Bruce Lee made martial arts films into a global phenomenon. His on-screen fight with Norris was one of the most famous in movie history.
There's a contract out on me.
With his good looks and genuine fighting prowess, Norris himself would pioneer a generation of North American action heroes.
You want to create some kind of an emotion out of the audience, not boredom or depression. Those kind of movies I can't stand, and those are the kind of movies I don't like to do.
His formula was simple. Bad guys start fights, he finishes them.
Elena?
One of his most famous roles was in the TV series Walker, Texas Ranger.
Say goodnight, Norris!
Norris's tough guy was so authentic, Hollywood played it up, and the world got in on the joke. So-called Chuck Norris facts are all over the internet.
When the boogeyman goes to sleep at night, he checks his closet for Chuck Norris.
Norris supported gun rights, no surprise there, and he backed Republicans. He once went skydiving with George H.W. Bush. 12 years ago, he stepped away from filmmaking when his wife became ill.
My whole life is focused on keeping her as well as I possibly can.
Today, Norris's family posted, "To the world, he was a martial artist, actor, and symbol of strength. To us, he was a devoted husband and a loving father." Norris will be remembered as a good guy who really could beat up a bad guy. And there'll always be those memes.
Bigfoot claims he once saw Chuck Norris.
Chuck Norris met his death at 86. He may demand a rematch.
And that is Global National for this Friday night. I'm Jeff Semple. And tonight's Your Canada is the first day of spring, but it sure doesn't look like it across much of the country, dealing with a messy mix of snow and freezing rain. Make it stop. Thanks for watching. Have a great night.